Tonight we're going to try to we're going to record this as always and send out a link to anyone who registered. We put it up on our YouTube channel, and I hope that anyone who has missed earlier webinars will take a moment to look at our playlist of the webinars to see if there's other subjects that you've missed that interest you. You can always get a link to any of those webinars to share with anyone who you believe would be interested in those topics. So without further ado, I'm going to make an admission. Tonight's topic is one that I try to avoid talking about for the simple reason that I am in the midst of, we at Regavim are in the midst of generating a report on this subject. It is not a classic Regavim topic, but we were drawn into it, and I will explain how that happened. But it is a crucial topic, I believe, for anyone who's interested in what's actually happening in Israel. And it really is a classic issue of behind the headlines. The topic of settler violence is one that I identified over a year ago as the next big thing that was coming up. I tried to convince the folks at Regavim that this was an important issue that we should address, but no one really wanted to get involved in it. And unfortunately, after the war broke out, it became clear to everyone that this was not something we could leave for others to address, and we had to take up this challenge. So what I'm going to share with you this evening is a variety of things having to do with the topic of settler violence, what it is and what it isn't. But I will give you a spoiler alert right now. I'm going to tell you the bottom line. The bottom line is that although settler violence does unfortunately exist, what we are looking at here is a massive blood libel, a classic blood libel. And when we get into the nitty-gritty as we go on this evening, you'll understand, I believe, a lot more about what that blood libel is made up of, how it came to be, and what its objectives are. So I'm going to share my screen now. Any questions that you have, I know that there were some questions that were submitted in advance. Some of them I hope to cover in the course of my remarks this evening, and I hope that anything that I don't cover, either because it's pertinent to a different subject or because we simply run out of time, you will certainly feel free to address to me directly by email or WhatsApp. We'll post those things at the end of the webinar as always. So I'm going to share my screen now, I hope. Hold on. 1 second. Yes. I'm having technical issues this evening. Share screen. Here we go. Share. And I hope that you are now seeing what I'm seeing, which is a series of quite a few slides. We're going to have to run through some of them quickly, but as always, I will post all of this entire presentation along with the YouTube of the video so that you can, and all the links to the websites I'm going to mention are all here, and you can look further into the actual data if we don't have time to delve into all of it in detail this evening. So here we go. Settler violence. I really do feel that we need to give something of a forward before we get into this. Before we go anywhere else, I'm not here this evening to say that there is no violence in the Jewish sector in Judea and Samaria. Unfortunately, I am not able to say that. No one denies that there are those who take the law into their own hands and who act in ways that they should not. The question is, how widespread is this? How much of this has actually increased since the outbreak of the war? And how much of it is a justifiable cause for the international reaction to settler violence? Where do the reports come from? Where are we getting our information from? and what is that information worth? So I had a long conversation in the course of my research on this topic with several professors of sociology and psychology at Hebrew University, at Bar-Ilan University. Behavioral science will tell you that there is violence in every human society on planet Earth, not only in human society, but in every society. That includes the animal kingdom as well. And the questions that we need to ask ourselves before we, as a preamble to this conversation is, number one, how widespread is this violence? And number two, how does the society respond to this violence? So aside from everything else we're going to say this evening, there are two things that I have to stress. Number one is the comparison of how Israeli society versus the Palestinian Authority relate to the incidents of violence in each respective society. And I would stress that the state of Israel has invested, it continues to invest millions and millions and millions of dollars and shekels, even more millions of shekels, to stamp out violence, to bring people who are engaged in violence to justice, and to educate against violence. The state of Israel treats violence in the Jewish sector extremely seriously. That being said, think again about the Palestinian Authority's treatment of violence and how it actually pays people to commit acts of violence, terrorism, and murder, glorifies that violence, teaches it as part of its curriculum, teaches children to carry out violence. So we have polar opposites in terms of the treatment of that violence. Those being said, as a forward, what we'd like to look at this evening are facts versus fiction, and the goals and objectives, goals being in the short term and objectives being in the long term of this entire narrative of settler violence. So let's see what we have here. The next slide, hopefully. Yes. The topics that I'd like to cover, and I know it looks very ambitious. It is. I don't know that we'll get to everything, but here it is. The sources of the narrative and sources of the funding. That will tell us a lot about what it is that we're really dealing with. Misinformation, meaning the data sources that are disseminating a false narrative. And three, real data, what we know, what we don't know, and why it is that we don't know what we don't know. Number four, who's buying it, and what are the ramifications of this campaign, this false information campaign. And as an afterthought, I added on, I couldn't resist, but trying to end on a slightly upbeat note. And that is that even though we are in the midst of a very, very difficult time, this war essentially presents certain opportunities. This war actually has become clearly a battle for truth. And there are some encouraging signs that truth is beginning to push back against the falsehoods. And we'll hopefully see some of that, have some time to look at some of the places, the ways, the topics in which truth is actually, I believe, emerging victorious or beginning to. And hopefully the topic for this evening, the narrative of settler violence, will be added to that list with your help. So here we are. The sources of funding and the sources of the narrative. We're in the midst really of a campaign, and there is certainly no doubt about that. There's no way that a topic such as this receives the kind of attention that it receives, that it has received and continues to receive, and has the kind of influence that it is having without a very carefully orchestrated campaign behind it. So where did this campaign begin, and who is conducting this campaign? The term settler violence first began to appear in European Union reports in 2012. That's a very long time. In 2015, the EU began to actually dedicate separate chapters in its annual report on this part of the world, on Judea and Samaria, the occupied Palestinian territories, all these, however you want to call it, the West Bank, separate chapters began to be dedicated in 2015 to settler violence. I would also note that since 2015, even before that, there has been a constant attempt to bring this campaign front and center. Every time there is a large occurrence of any kind here in Israel, the European Union reports point to whatever that event is and say this has been the reason for a surge in settler violence. This has been going on for decades. So going backwards, the Guardian of the Walls mini war, essentially, the kidnapping of the three teenage boys that sparked it, the olive harvest every year, all the time. There are things that the European Union claims has set off a surge in settler violence. So we're going to look at the data and see how much of that is actually true and how much of it is actually false. In 2019, the European Union began to pay to fund a specific campaign dedicated to settler violence. That is the first record that we have, and I will show you now exactly what the name of that, what this was called. The two main organizations were chosen as the front men, as it were, for this campaign of settler violence in 2019. Those two organizations, I call them not NGOs, but FOGOs, which stands for Foreign Government Funded Organizations. These two main organizations, Breaking the Silence and B'Tselem, were paid 300,000 euros, equivalent to 1.18 million shekel, or about $400,000, to spearhead the campaign of settler violence. Now, again, it sounds like a lot of money to me, but it is actually a very small percentage of the amount of money that the European Union spent in that year for projects in the quote-unquote occupied Palestinian territories. Out of 130 million, so it's small change, right? 130 million, this is 1.18 million shekels out of a budget of 130 million shekels that the European Union spent in that year. The specifics of that funding were to B'Tselem and Breaking the Silence, that they were paid to provide information and strategic and objective analysis regarding settler violence in order to increase respect of human rights and international humanitarian law, and to hold Israeli authorities accountable for settler violence. Now, that sounds big. Whenever you use the word objective, it sounds wonderful. But here's some facts. Between 2012 and 2020, B'Tselem reported donations amounting to 46.25 million shekel, $13 million, from foreign governmental sources alone. There's a massive funding here, and we know exactly where it goes. Breaking the Silence, in that same year that it received this money from the European Union together with B'Tselem, received that year $10 million, 29 million shekel, 60% from foreign governments, right? This doesn't include all of the humanitarian organizations, church organizations, the New Israel Fund, Open Society, Rockefellers, Ford, all of those other anti-Israel organizations that are not foreign governments. So they had a massive income of $10 million that year. That's only in 1 year. In that same year, they only spent, according to their own reporting, $2.383 million. So there's around $8 million floating around in someone's pocket for 2019 alone. So we all know that there is a very, very good business to be done bashing Israel. And Breaking the Silence has made a career out of bashing Israel and getting paid very, very handsomely to do so. But these, again, are only a small part, because under the radar, as I mentioned, those two organizations are the frontmen for this campaign. But
what?
Oops, sorry.
Okay.
Those two organizations are the frontmen for the campaign, but under the radar, the EU has massive funding streams aside from that. So in that same year, the European Union spent $30 million for Palestinian projects alone. And some of them look like this. This I simply copied off of the European Union's page, and I hope you can appreciate this. $30 million here are all for projects that I identified without looking very, very deeply. $30 million worth of projects in 2019, all for things having to do with violence. So the sum that I mentioned before is this sum right here, the 300,000 euros. But look at all the rest of them. And look at the big money. Oops, sorry. Go back again. The big money really was spent elsewhere, quietly. Was paid to organizations that most of you have never heard of. For example, FIDH, it's the International Federation of Human Rights, and they were paid $15 million for this project, and another 3.3 euros, and another 3.3 million euros for this project. And then B'Tselem and Breaking the Silence, B'Tselem in particular, was paid. Here's Breaking the Silence got another shared grant of 400,000 euros with the Association for Civil Rights in Israel. And Yesh Din, Physicians for Human Rights, PCATI, Akevot, Zulat, Breaking the Silence here, Combatants for Peace, Ir Amim, all of these organizations also receive money from this organization. So the European Union funds all of them directly and then funds them more indirectly. Sorry, this keeps jumping. And all of this money is being poured in to anti-Israel, quote unquote, nonprofits. And this is just specifically things having to do with violence. So it's projects for violence against women, violence against children, violence against cattle, violence against goats, violence against I don't know what, but violence of all sorts. So and the money comes pouring in. Now, the same money very, very often is what's creating the data sources upon which foreign governments, certainly foreign media, all rely. So if you take any of the reports that were, any of the government statements that from your own government, you will see that they quote, they simply copy paste straight out of one or two sources of data and take that as gospel. So we're going to look at what all of this money has been used to create, which is the data sources. And this is what it looks like. The data sources come from essentially three places. The first is so outrageous and unreliable that almost no one quotes it. And the second two are the real sources of data upon which the United States administration, the French government, the Canadian government, the European Union itself, the United Nations, all rely upon. So we're going to look at all three of these sources of data, which again were paid for by the European Union for the most part. So the first is the Palestinian Authority itself. And the data comes from a very particular ministry. It's called the Palestinian Ministry Against Colonization and Wall Resistance. The minister is Moad Sha'ban. We have lots of footage of him actually praising the massacre of October 7th and calling for similar activity in Judea and Samaria against Jews. That's a lecture that we had another day. You can look back on previous webinars and you'll see this guy in a starring role. But his ministry is one of the sources of information. He recently released statements saying that there were 12,000 incidents of violence by Jewish settlers against Palestinians in Area C since the outbreak of the war. Now, that figure was so outrageous that it wasn't even quoted in Haaretz because it's clearly so insane. But that's one source of information that the more extreme anti-Israel forces will rely upon. The others claim to be much more objective and fact-based. Those two are the United Nations OCHA dashboard, which I'm going to show you in a minute, and B'Tselem's reports on displacement and violence. So let's have a look. This is the United Nations, we call it OCHA. It's the Organization for Human Rights that is very, very active in Yehuda and Shomron, in the Arab communities. So here is the dashboard address for any of you who want to look at it yourselves. I'd like to show it to you. I don't know if I'll be able to. I tried to. Yes. Are you seeing this right now? Are you seeing the OCHA board? Yes.
No, we're not.
You're not. Okay, let me see what I can do about, pause, share. Stop share. I'm going to do a new screen share. Sorry. Screen share. It's important for me to show this to you simply because. Share. Let's see if that works. How about now? Yes. Good. OCHA, data on casualties. This is the United Nations Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs. This is their famous dashboard. And it gives you all the data, and it looks horrible. So first of all, they'll tell you, they have field operatives and everything is verified by 2 sources. So we're going to look at both at the data and about their process in one moment. But also notice that the first thing they do here is they show you Palestinian fatalities, but they show it to you starting in 2008. If you limit the dates, let's look at 1 year, for example. Okay, let's look at, no, we want to do the 1st of January 2023 to the 1st of January 2024. And we want to look only at the West Bank. Now the number goes to 558 Palestinian fatalities. However, if you take only settler-related incidents, it goes down to 27. What does that mean? It means that they count when an Israeli army goes into a Palestinian terror nest to arrest people and terrorists are killed in the process, they count that as settler violence, unless you know how to use this key to take it out. When you just look at the figure, you get a massive figure of hundreds of people killed. Then let's try this. Perpetrator. Only Israeli civilian settlers. The number goes down to 9. It started off at over 500, but we're now left with 9. Okay? Now, of course, they have only one category for the Palestinian casualties, and that's civilian. They don't count terrorists. They don't make any distinction between any of that. Now, that's bad enough, right? That's a terrible number. It's all men, adult men, and they were all killed by live fire. Tells you exactly where the incident took place. But I want to show you something here. And it's very, very important. Incidents involving Israeli settlers. Read this with me. Includes attacks and alleged attacks by Israeli settlers, as well as incidents involving access prevention and clashes following the entry of Israeli settlers into Palestinian communities. It also includes Palestinians killed or injured during attacks or alleged attacks they perpetrated against Israeli settlers. That means that if terrorists infiltrate a Jewish community and are killed in the process by either the local security or the civilians themselves, that's considered an incident of settler violence, and it is part of this accounting. Now, everywhere else in the world, when someone protects themselves against an attack, that's not considered an act of unprovoked Israeli settler violence, right? It simply isn't. I'm now going to stop that share for a moment. So you have to think about where you have to actually read the sources in order to understand what it is that they're selling you. And once you do, you will understand that they're playing with the numbers in order to misrepresent. So again, it includes terrorists killed in action. It includes attackers killed by Israelis who acted in self-defense, sorry. It includes injuries sustained in traffic accidents in which Israelis were involved. I don't know where this went, sorry. And it includes non-Muslim visits to the Temple Mount, right? All these things are considered settler violence by the United Nations. The B'Tselem report is not much better. And we'll talk about how they verify these reports as well. But we're going to look at the B'Tselem site in 1 second. Notice that the B'Tselem website is actually the campaign's title. It's the campaign that they began in 2019. It's called Settler Violence Equals State Violence. Ladies and gentlemen, that title tells you the bottom line of this whole story. Settler violence is being used by anti-Israel forces, not only to malign the Jewish population of Judea and Samaria and to delegitimize the Jewish presence in Judea and Samaria, it is being used to tar with the same brush the Israel Defense Forces and undermine the moral underpinnings of our army. From there, it is a very, very simple step to delegitimizing the entire state of Israel's existence. But B'Tselem doesn't hide the goals of the settler violence campaign, because look at the title. This is the banner on their website, which we'll look at in a moment. Settler violence equals state violence. Now, as in the case of the OCHA report, the majority of the materials, if you look closely at the materials, it will tell you that they are provided, the materials in their reports are provided by the purported victims themselves. These victims, quote unquote, are almost always paid employees of anti-Israel organizations. So they're paying them to create or testify to events that did or did not happen. And for the most part, there is no documentation. We'll look at that in one moment. The sites of the purported incidents are overwhelmingly illegal Palestinian Authority outposts. Now, this is how Regavim became involved in this entire campaign and in this research, because we began to see reports time after time after time of violent incidents that were coming. For example, one of the most concentrated areas of confrontation, quote unquote, and violent conflict were all of the illegal outposts in the IDF firing zones in the South Hebron area, what's known as Masafar Yatta. All of the illegal construction that we have been complaining about and that we have been documenting and monitoring for years has become the base for anti-Israel violence against Jewish communities and against IDF forces. So that's another thing that we notice and we'll see together in one moment when I take you over to the B'Tselem website. Again, the conflation of IDF and home front security actions with settler violence, settlers and soldiers you'll see when we look at the report in one moment, you will see these words over and over again. Settlers and soldiers, settlers accompanied by soldiers, settlers dressed as soldiers, settlers disguised as soldiers. All of these things are clear attempts to conflate demonized Jewish settlers with the IDF, and therefore to cast a shadow of immorality on the IDF itself. Almost every single one of the reports on their website will have one or another of these combinations of words in order to create this equation: settler violence equals state violence. There's virtually no documentation, which is extremely funny when you think about it, because they know very, very well how to use cameras and to bring reporters when they want to. So we're going to look at some of those things right here. This, for example, I took off of their website. This is the picture that they have documenting how Jewish settlers are destroying Arabs' olive trees. Do you see any settlers? Do you see any Arabs? Do you see any destruction? No, but this is the documentation that they have for how Jewish settlers are destroying, uprooting, chopping down, or burning Arabs' olive trees. That's the only documentation they have. This, for example, are documentation of two different reports of how people were attacked by settlers. On both of them, they say the photos were provided by the victims themselves. This man here is showing his wounds that were inflicted supposedly by settlers and soldiers. I don't see any wounds. He's showing a scar here that's clearly already healed. I have no idea what the deal is. And here is a man with a bandage on his head. And we know nothing more. The story that is behind this incident is that he's a teacher in an UNRWA-funded school, and we'll get to that again later. Some teenagers came running past him and said that the settlers were after him. So he jumped into his car to move his car. That's what he claims. And the settlers then attacked him, and he was detained and questioned and eventually released, and then went to have his wounds that the settlers and the soldiers inflicted upon him treated. So the actual army report for the same incident is that this guy was trying to help teenagers who were attacking a Jewish community escape from the scene of the crime, and he was therefore detained. He was questioned, and he was eventually released. So again, the sources of information are extremely, shall we say, questionable. I think maybe I won't take you to the B'Tselem site itself. You can go, but I will put into the chat the address, but it's really very simple. Just write the word B'Tselem and it will take you to their website, and you can, the very first page is B'Tselem's state violence, settler violence equals state violence, and you'll see the entire report. But now we have the real question for this evening, and that is, what do we actually know? What is the truth about settler violence? Where do we get real information from? And why is it so hard to come by? Why has the state of Israel not fought back against this campaign? So I'm going to present three sources this evening. They are the only sources that we have, and they are very, very poor sources for a variety of reasons. The three sources that we're going to look at are Israel National Police data, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs data that any of you can view on the Ministry of Foreign Affairs website. That website has, look up Wave of Terror 2015, and you will go straight to their data. And the third is data collected by Rescuers Without Borders. Their data is actually verified by the Israel National Police and the Shabak, Israel's secret service, essentially, which relies on their data in order to identify areas, trouble spots, hot spots, all sorts of trends in anti-Jewish violence. So here's what we know. First, let's look at the Israel National Police data. This has been a massive debate in Israel because all of this settler violence narrative was unanswered by the government itself. And what you see in front of you here was a document that was leaked to a particular reporter, and the reporter shared it with me, which is why it's such a strange looking document, because it's simply a picture taken by the reporter's phone of a document that he was shown by a member of Knesset, the head of the Foreign Affairs and Defense, the second, not the head, the deputy head of the Foreign Affairs and Defense Committee of the Knesset. And these are official national police data. And there's several problems with it. So I'm going to explain to you what you're looking at, and then I'm going to explain what the problem is. What you see here is 2023 in a nutshell. All the incidents of all nationalist incidents involving violence in the Jewish sector, right? So what you see is month by month, January, February, March, April, etc., and various categories here. Now, I'm going to give you a quick explanation of what these categories mean, and then you will understand for yourself exactly why this is so problematic. So the categories go like this. What you have here is the total, and this is what they call, this is what they call nationalist or grassroots terror. Grassroots terror. This is chikuch alim, means violent confrontation or a standoff. This is agricultural crime. This is incidents involving Israeli forces, either police or army. This is actual terrorist incidents, pigua, right? And this is a serious pigua, a serious terrorist incident. Notice how much of it is serious. Now, what goes into these categories? Here's the problem. In the Jewish sector, these categories, this category, for example, which has massive numbers, really distressing numbers of incidents, 568 incidents in a year. This includes things like graffiti and insults and all sorts of things. No violence involved whatsoever. If a kid writes graffiti on a wall someplace, that is a nationalist incident. It goes in here in the question of nationalist crime and violence, and that's one of these, right? This does not tell you, this is violent face-off. Now, it doesn't tell you who instigated it. It doesn't tell you if there was a terrorist attack and Jews came to the scene of the crime and did not allow further Arab cars to come onto the road, or blocked the route that was used by terrorists to get in, or other things like that. It just says confrontation, violent confrontation. Also a distressing number, 254 in a year. This is agricultural crime. Again, we'll talk about that in a minute. This did not involve any Arabs whatsoever. This is Jews against Jews, Jews against either the Israel police or the IDF, right? 61 incidents there, very distressing. These are actual pigua, right? Pigua meaning a violent act of terrorism. However, This category also includes things like defacing mosques or religious schools in which there were no casualties. Pigua Hamur involved casualties. Ladies and gentlemen, please look at the numbers that involved casualties in the year 2023. Not a massive number. You could say that in this month, there was a surge in violent incidents because the surge involved 3 casualties as opposed to 0 or 1. That's a surge, okay? Indeed. So you can use words to create a reality, but the facts of the matter are this data does not support the claim for a surge in settler violence by any means. There are also, again, major problems with the way violence is counted, but I return to what I said at the very beginning in my opening remarks. The reason that the Israel police collects data on things like graffiti, on things like insults on social media, et cetera, and counts those as nationalist violence in the Jewish sector is because we, as a society, take these things very seriously and try to stop them and try to prevent them and try to educate against them. In the Arab sector, no one, not the Israeli authorities and certainly not the Palestinian authorities, no one is keeping track of those sorts of incidents at all. They aren't counted at all because no one cares, or because we have some sort of racism of low expectations. We don't think that it is unusual for Arabs to be defacing places of Jewish worship or Jewish cemeteries. We don't think it's unusual for them to be writing racist graffiti. We don't think of threats against Jews as anything unusual. That's all I can tell you. These statistics reflect the seriousness with which Israeli society takes the task of stamping out violence. And again, let's think about what they really are. If we talk about 4 incidents in a year here, and maybe 45 others here that include things that aren't considered violence, and we compare that to human societies in places that you know of. For example, in the United States, if you're a resident, there are 500,000 Jews in Judea and Samaria. No one knows how many Palestinians there are, how many Arabs there are in Area C. But let's take an extremely generous view and say that there are 200,000, even though the Palestinian Authority claims there are 360, and there are those who claim that there are 100,000 or less. So we'll go for something in the middle. The possibility of being a victim of violent crime if you are an Arab in Judea and Samaria is, no, let's put it this way. If you live in a city in the United States that is of comparable size to the Jewish population of Judea and Samaria, 500,000 people, you have a more than 350% greater chance of being a victim of violent crime than you do if you're an Arab living in Area C. So the wave of violence is really non-existent. The violence in general in Jewish society, even if you take these extremely expansive data, is minute. But let's look at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs put out a report which it has not updated since the middle of 2023. It's called The Wave of Terror 2015 to 2023. This is the website. I've brought in the next few slides some interesting pieces, but I just want to point out, again, this counts Arab violence against Jews. It doesn't keep track of Jewish violence against Arabs for the simple reason that there were no incidents to report that fit into the same categories created by the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. And these incidents, which I'm about to show you, were only incidents in which there were casualties, not all of the attempts. So, for example, in January 2023, there were 248 attacks, right? Fire bombings, pipe bombs, small arms, arson, ramming attacks, and physical assaults. in addition to rockets and automatic gunfire. 7 people were killed in these attacks and 10 were injured. That's January 2023. Let's look at February 2023. Situation was a little bit better. 195 attacks, 7 people killed, 6 injured. Again, fire bombs, pipe bombs, small arms, stone throwing, rockets, assaults, vehicular attacks, automatic gunfire, etc. How about another month? March 2023, 201 attacks, fire bombs, pipe bombs, arson, assaults, roadside bombs. 1 person was killed in the March terror attacks. It goes on and on. In April 2023, there were also 189 attacks. You get the idea. You can go back all the way to 2015 and see exactly what the situation was. So this is a second source of actual information. But the most up-to-date and most authoritative report is from Rescuers Without Borders. All of this data is verified, all incidents in which medical response was required. They answer calls involving both Jews and Arabs. They do not include incidents handled by the IDF, and they do not include anything that shouldn't be considered violence, including property damage, graffiti, confrontations with Israeli forces, etc. So their data is clean data in which first responders had to act. And here it is. They don't have it in English. I apologize, but you can see from the little graphics here exactly what it is that we're looking at. We're talking here about January to June. This is 6 months. 6 months. I apologize. This is a typo. It's 2023, not 2024. That is my mistake. But here it is. 2,118 attacks by stone. Some of them caused deaths. Most of them caused casualties. Almost 800 Molotov cocktail attacks, burning tires. Here you have, oh, it's for some reason I can't see the bottom. It's self-explanatory, right? We're talking about a massive amount of violence, all of this against Jews. There was one incident in which they responded in all of 2023 that involved Jews and Arabs. And that was later determined to have been an act of self-defense. This covers the first 2 months of the war, because we were talking about a surge in settler violence after the outbreak of the war. We wanted to see if that was actually the case. So this is the surge in violence. Unfortunately, it's a surge in violence by Arabs against Jews, right? 569 stone attacks, 319 burning tires. You have Molotov cocktails, you have explosions, you have shootings. All of these things, this is the summary. There were 3,681 violent incidents perpetrated by Arabs against Jews in Judea and Samaria and the Jordan Valley in the first half of 2023. A monthly average of 510 incidents resulting in casualties, 17 incidents a day. Between October 7th and December 7th, there were 1,381 violent incidents, a monthly average of 690 and a half. Again, a surge in violence, but the exact opposite of what they're trying to convince you in Haaretz and in the Biden administration. The surge in violence is by Arabs against Jews and not the other way around. So who's buying it? Well, your government. Unfortunately, my government here in Israel bought it for too long. And here's some of the ramifications. The United States delayed the sale of assault rifles to Israel for local protection. It has slowed the provision of arms and munitions in a time of war. It has announced that it will deny visas to settlers, but it didn't say that actually. It said something far worse. It said that it would deny visas to anyone deemed by the US administration to be a threat to stability. I have news for you. Our very existence as Jews in the state of Israel, in the Middle East, is a threat to stability. And they can therefore deny a visa to anyone they please. But the worst message of this is that they have essentially expressed zero faith in Israel's entire judicial and enforcement systems, because they have not said only people who are accused of a crime or tried for a crime or found guilty of a crime or gone to jail for a crime. They've said no. Essentially, we will decide who is guilty because we have no faith that the Israeli government will do so. That is a much, much more problematic statement. And it is a statement that has been made not only by the American administration, by the US government, but by France and by at least 7 other, Australia, Belgium, Canada, Denmark, European Union, Finland, Ireland, France, Luxembourg, the Netherlands. They've all joined the United States statement saying that they would deny visas to anyone they feel is a threat to the stability of the region. Good luck. That's all I'll say. So I'm going to try to wrap up and leave some time for questions. But I'm going to do so hopefully with a bit of encouraging news. This war and the events that set it off and the way that it is unfolding are also an opportunity, I think, to finally engage in the battle for truth. Because so much of what has happened and so much of what is happening around us is actually forcing the world to look at data and look at numbers and look at narratives and separate out and choose whether they want to go with truth or go with narrative. So this began when we started out by saying, by showing that the Palestinian Authority is not a legitimate partner for peace and that there is no difference between the Palestinian Authority and Hamas. The Palestinian Authority made it extremely simple by saying over and over and over again that they supported Hamas, that Hamas are their partners, and that they are fully engaged in any present or future political framework of Palestinian self-rule. And now people have to choose. Are they going to listen to what the Palestinians themselves say and believe them and take them for their word? Or are they going to continue to prefer some false narrative that calls for creation of a Palestinian state by these quote unquote moderates of the Palestinian Authority? So the Palestinian Authority themselves are not allowing world opinion to continue to ignore their statements, and they continue to say what they mean and mean what they say. So really, it's a question here of step one in the battle for truth, in the battle for actually a proper assessment of what is being said and who is saying it and why. Hamas as a government, over and over again, the ruling conception, the paradigm that has been at the base that allowed all of this situation, that allowed the massacre of October 7th and allowed this war to be what it is that we could buy coexistence through economic incentives, and that Hamas was actually interested in governing the territory that it was given. So Hamas has said clearly it has absolutely no responsibility for the citizens of the Gaza Strip. They are all refugees and are therefore the responsibility of the United Nations. So Hamas as a government, Hamas as a governing power, there's truth and there's narrative. And the narrative is it's becoming harder and harder for the United States and other governments to continue to cling to that narrative when Hamas itself refutes that narrative. So we have truth and we have narrative. We have also the truth versus narrative of innocent Gazans versus Hamas operatives, and the question of how Hamas came to power and how it remains in power, and what its support among the Palestinian population is. Palestinians say clearly what they mean, and they mean what they say, when over 80% of Palestinians, both in Judea and Samaria, and slightly less in Gaza itself, continue to express full support, not only for Hamas's goals, but for its tactics. And that includes murder, rape, incineration of innocent men, women, and children, taking of hostages, and violation of every norm of human society. So you have truth, and then you have this narrative that there's somebody to talk to about making peace, and people are going to have to choose. You also have specific cases in which truth versus narrative came into full view. The initial reports of the catastrophe, quote unquote, at the Al-Ahli hospital in Gaza, in which Israel was accused immediately of killing 500 innocent civilians in an airstrike, which it turned out was actually a failed Hamas rocket launch that killed perhaps 10 people. So the difference between truth versus narrative was placed on full display. New York Times, Wall Street Journal, New York Post, all of them actually analyzed this strange disconnect that happens when you accept data that is provided to you by one side that has a very clear vested interest in creating an anti-Israel narrative. So hopefully the lessons learned from the Al-Ahli hospital incident will be applied to this settler violence narrative as well, because it's the exact same sources of information that are feeding both of these bloodlines. The Shifa Hospital as a humanitarian installation, a place of healing, etc., was laid bare for the world to see. All of the tunnels, all of the ammunition, all of the hostages that were taken to the hospital on the day of the massacre, all of that essentially, once again, has placed truth versus anti-Israel narrative in the spotlight. The most recent and most serious ray of hope comes from, finally, the unmasking of UNRWA. The United Nations Refugee Works Association, essentially the organization in charge of creating and maintaining Palestinian refugeeism and educating generations of Palestinians to hate, to kill, and to replace Israel, has been unmasked as a terrorist affiliate, and increasingly more and more of the contributors to UNRWA are canceling or at least suspending their support for this organization. So something that we've been talking about for years and years and years has finally happened. The nations of the world and the United Nations, the European Union itself, has been forced to admit that UNRWA is not part of the solution. It is part of the problem. It is a full subsidiary of Hamas and is a terrorist organization and should be disbanded. And between you and me, and this is a conversation for another day, if UNRWA is disbanded, you will solve 80% of the Palestinian problem, because there will be no refugees to discuss here. We're talking about people who have citizenship in other countries, a refugee status that is inherited like no other in the world. And UNRWA is not only the arbiter, but the cause of 80% of the Palestinian problem. Once UNRWA is finally treated for what it is, and that has begun already, we will see massive change on the ground and a much better future for everyone involved, and a possibility for a normal resolution of the situation here. So I hope that I've covered most of the issues that you've asked me about in the chat. Some of the questions were about other topics that we will have to deal with in other webinars. For example, how do we regain control of the Negev, a major area of Regavim activity, which I'll be happy to discuss at another time. But if there were specific questions, I'm going to look in the chat now. Again, my address by email is naomi@regavim.org. And I am also going to just quickly mention that because of the war, I canceled various speaking engagements in the United States. Hopefully, moving forward, I will be going to speak in the United States in various communities. If you are interested in hosting a parlor meeting or a lecture or introducing other people in your community to our work and some of these topics, feel free to reach out and we'll try to put it together. Looking forward to quieter, more peaceful times, and praying that all our hostages are returned quickly and safely, and our soldiers can come home to their families, and that we will see the real victory that we're all waiting for. It can happen very quickly, and we have full faith that it will. Thank you for joining us, and I look forward to seeing you again at our next webinar.